Can a man fear death so much that he devours the still pulsing hearts of his enemies? Can a king, destined to rule with justice, become a creature that lurks in the corridors of his own palace, with hands covered in fresh blood? History is filled with tyrants, but few dared to cross the boundary of humanity. He did, and he did it in the name of immortality. The soul grows stronger when it feeds on what it fears, once wrote one of his chroniclers. But what that man feared was death, and what he devoured was human flesh. This is the legacy of a Tsar whose obsession with eternity drove him into the darkest depths of madness. Today we speak of Tsar Alexei Romanov, the king who, according to hidden 17th century documents and testimonies silenced for centuries, supposedly sought eternal life by feeding on human organs still warm, ripped from living bodies by his own executioners. His name has been erased from many official chronicles, but in legends, in the whispers of Russian villages, and in the forbidden writings of some monks, his figure appears as that of the Wolf King, the one who drank blood like wine and believed that the lungs of a traitor could cure his ailments. Before becoming a shadow wandering the catacombs of the Kremlin, Alexei had been a sickly, fragile child, obsessed with death ever since he saw his mother bleed to death before his eyes. Family chronicles portray him as a brilliant but somber youth, an avid reader of alchemical treatises and forbidden grimoires. His obsession with eternal life led him to seek out witches, Siberian shamans, and European alchemists. One of them, they say, whispered to him the formula for longevity: flesh of the living, blood of the traitor, breath of the dying. Alexei's story is not only horrifying because of his acts, but also for how well he managed to conceal them for years. To the world, he appeared a reformist Tsar, a lover of the arts, patron of astronomers and poets. Yet, in the basements of his palace, rituals were performed that would have made even Ivan the Terrible shudder. It is this contrast that makes his tale so disturbing. How can someone be both a symbol of civilization and a monster hiding behind a crown? One of his most infamous crimes, documented by a Venetian ambassador, recounts how he ordered 6 nobles executed for conspiracy. Up to that point, nothing unusual in the brutal politics of his time. But what followed fed the legends. The Tsar commanded that their bodies not be buried. Instead, he took them to a secret chamber, where he held a macabre banquet surrounded by whispers, torches, and silence. It is said he ate part of one of their hearts, still warm, while reciting a prayer in ancient Latin. According to him, the purpose was to absorb their power, their spirit, their life. Many doubted these stories, dismissing them as exaggerations by political enemies. But in 1948, during a secret restoration in a forgotten part of the Kremlin, manuscripts were found in which a monk described the ritual of living flesh, practiced by Tsar Alexei, accompanied by grotesque illustrations matching oral legends. The document was quickly classified by the KGB and buried under state secrecy. Now that we know the levels of horror he was capable of reaching, the inevitable question arises: how was it possible for someone like him to rise to power? What transformed a frail, sick boy into a monster thirsty for organs? Was it illness, trauma, or the uncontrollable desire to defeat death? To understand that, we must go back to his childhood, to the cold corridors of the Kremlin, where echoes of madness began to take root. Alexei was not born a king. His rise was a combination of family tragedies, bloody conspiracies, and a mind determined to survive, no matter the cost. And it is here that his true story begins. Because for some, hell is not a punishment, it is a choice. The year was 1643. Russia was still healing from the wounds of the time of troubles, that dark period when anarchy, famines, and civil wars nearly destroyed the nation's soul. It was within this context of national fragility rampant superstition, and shaky authority that Alexei Romanov was born, the third son of a minor prince with no direct claim to the throne. His birth was not celebrated with bells or dances. According to the diary of a servant close to his mother, he was born small, almost lifeless, as if death had rejected him. The court considered him unimportant. He was neither heir nor favorite. But fate, capricious and cruel, began clearing his path to power through a series of premature deaths. His older brother died from an infection that consumed his face. The second was poisoned at a banquet with Lithuanian diplomats. Suddenly, the frail, lonely, silent child became the sole male heir with direct Romanov blood. Still, few bet on him. Feverish fits kept him bedridden for weeks. They said he spoke to himself and cried whenever church bells rang. But Alexei survived. Always. As if an invisible force protected him. Some began to whisper he was cursed. Others claimed he had been marked by God. The truth, as with so many things in his life, was darker. From the age of 11, he secretly consulted healers and witches who treated him with impure remedies, formulas made from black hen's blood, hanged man's skin, and human ashes. His mother died when he was 13. From then on, something broke in his gaze. He stopped playing, stopped smiling. He began obsessively reading everything related to alchemy, ancient medicine, and Hermetic texts. He had a morbid fascination with Egyptian mummies and medieval methods of preserving the human body. The servants heard him mutter at night, "The soul escapes through the tongue. The heart holds it. If I eat it, it will be mine." When his father was assassinated in an ambush during a military campaign, young Alexei was left orphaned, but not unprotected. A council of boyars politically adopted him and installed him as interim Tsar at 16, while deciding whether a distant cousin should take the throne instead. But in the darkness of the Kremlin, Alexei pulled the strings. One by one, his rivals died mysteriously. Poisoning, horse accidents, falls down staircases. Within 3 months, no one remained who could challenge him. On the day he was officially crowned, the bells of Moscow rang louder than ever before. Cloaked in a scarlet mantle embroidered with pagan symbols hidden among Orthodox crosses, he received the crown with words no one would forget. Today, not only is a Tsar born, today, eternity is born. Many saw him as a redeemer. He restored order, increased state revenues, promoted the arts, and strengthened the Orthodox Church. But his enemies began disappearing too frequently. Any rumor of dissent was crushed without mercy. His spy network reached even the humblest homes. And behind that mask of just ruler, something darker was brewing. It is true that the Russian people were used to harsh leaders. Ivan the Terrible had sown terror a century earlier. But what made Alexei different was his ritualism. He didn't kill for power. He killed to feed himself. Or so some whispered inside the palace. In a letter addressed to the Patriarch of Moscow, one of the royal cooks desperately wrote, "I have served viscera that do not come from animals. The Tsar looks at me and smiles. He says that with every feast, he becomes stronger." The letter never reached its destination. The cook was found hanging 2 days later. The official report called it suicide, but no one believed it. The nobility began to fear him, but they also needed him. Alexei brought stability, even if at a macabre price. Like a Faustian pact, the boyars accepted to look away in exchange for keeping their titles, lands, and heads. Yet the real transformation did not happen in public, but in secret. In the bowels of the palace, Alexei built what would later be known as the Chamber of Eternal Blood, a hidden sanctuary where he conducted nocturnal rituals with the help of foreign alchemists. There, he began the practice that would forever mark his reign, feeding on human organs extracted alive. to rejuvenate the spirit. This abomination was not an isolated act. It was a methodical, escalating pattern. Because horror, like power, is addictive. And with this monstrous habit, we begin our descent into the darkest chapter of Alexei's reign, a story where the banquet is not made of gold and wine, but of blood, lungs, and hearts. The first rumors were not taken seriously. They said Tsar Alexei locked himself away during the darkest nights of the new moon, that guards were relieved from duty, and a procession of hooded figures entered the Kremlin through the southern gate, carrying heavy sacks that dripped a thick, dark liquid. To most, it was gossip, stories told by maids and drunken soldiers. But to those living within the palace walls, the fear was real. The first documented case of an immortality banquet occurred in 1661, when a peasant revolt was brutally crushed in the Nizhny Novgorod region. Over 300 insurgents were executed, but 12 of them were selected, not for the gallows, but to be sent to Moscow. According to a report by a Swedish spy infiltrated into the court, Alexei requested that the prisoners arrive alive and in good health. They were housed in the underground dungeons of the Kremlin, where the Tsar's alchemists kept them alive for weeks, for anatomical studies. One night, one of the executioners defected. His testimony, recovered years later by the Polish Inquisition, describes a horrifying ritual. The Tsar was dressed in a white tunic. In the center of the room, one of the prisoners was tied to a stone table. Alexei spoke words in a language I didn't recognize. Then, with a knife with a bone handle, he opened the man's chest and pulled out his still pulsing heart. He brought it to his mouth and bit into it, not as someone who eats, but as someone who drinks. And then he sang. He sang like a happy child. That was the beginning of a series of periodic rituals. Every new moon, new political prisoners were sent to the Kremlin. No one ever saw them again. Some servants claimed to have heard screams for hours. Others spoke of a stench, not of rot, but of fresh meat and coagulated blood on the walls. As the rituals repeated, Alexei's health seemed to improve. His skin was no longer pale. His feverish attacks disappeared. Some claimed he was rejuvenating. A foreign noble wrote in his diary, "I saw the Tsar for the first time 5 years ago. Today I saw him again, and he seems younger. He has the vigor of a man in his 30s, though he should be nearing 50. This only fueled the paranoia among the boyars. Many began seeking ways to protect themselves. Some turned to religious amulets, others to magic. The Orthodox Patriarch of Moscow attempted to confront him, but vanished a week later. The official story was that he suddenly fell ill and died in a monastery, but there are records showing his burial was never held, and the monks at the monastery where he supposedly died never received his body. The rituals were not improvised. They followed precise patterns. The victim had to be alive, the heart had to be extracted with the first cut, and the blood could not touch the ground. The Tsar believed each organ contained a vital frequency, and that if consumed at the right moment, that energy would be absorbed by his body. He even created an organ catalog, according to a text attributed to his personal alchemist, classifying the mystical properties of each part of the human body. The lungs of a traitor granted longevity. The liver of a virgin gave mental clarity. The eyes of a poet offered prophetic vision. One of the most gruesome stories occurred in 1665, when a court poetess named Marfa Yakovleva was accused of conspiring against the Tsar. She was known for her beauty and angelic voice. There was no trial. She was taken to the Kremlin, and according to rumors, Alexei ordered her eyes removed while she was still singing. That same night, the Tsar delivered one of his most inspired speeches, filled with metaphors, celestial visions, and exact predictions of astronomical phenomena. The courtiers applauded, unaware of what had inspired him. From then on, his speeches became increasingly strange. They mixed theology, alchemy, and veiled threats. He spoke of a new body he was building from pieces of many. He said he was not just Alexei, but a legion of souls within a single flesh. Some began calling him, in hushed tones, the composite Tsar. But if his body grew stronger, his mind began to fracture. Chronicles speak of long monologues in front of mirrors, of letters written to himself in dead languages. He isolated himself for days, drinking infusions made from coagulated blood and exotic flowers brought from Persia. Yet to the eyes of the people, he remained an effective leader. Harvests were good, taxes were reasonable, the country was at peace, and no one imagined that at the heart of the empire, their ruler transformed every night into something less human and more hungry. But the horror did not end there. What began as a secret ritual became a regular practice, an institution, a death machine serving a single purpose: to mock the grave. And in the next chapter, we will learn about the system Alexei built to maintain his macabre diet, and how he corrupted an entire generation of servants, doctors, executioners, and nobles to sustain his grotesque utopia. Over the years, Tsar Alexei's crimes ceased to be spontaneous rituals and became a perfectly oiled machine. These were no longer simple personal sacrifices. Now they were part of the state structure. There were hierarchies, protocols, even encrypted records that tracked each donor and the effects their organs caused in the Tsar. Thus was born what some historians call the network of living flesh, a system of kidnapping, torture, and human extraction in service of the throne. It all began with the creation of a special elite unit, known as the Keepers of the Blood. Officially, they were a secret guard serving imperial security. In reality, they were hunters of people. They were given total autonomy. They could enter any home without prior order. They could take prisoners without explaining motives. They could kill if resistance was encountered. Their targets were carefully selected: healthy young individuals with pure lineages, no known illnesses, and minimal political connections. They were people who could disappear without raising too many questions. The keepers wore no uniform. They dressed as peasants, priests, or merchants. They were ordered to act in secrecy. Sometimes they drugged their victims. Other times, they deceived them with promises of work or royal audience. But once in their hands, the fate was always the same. The underground chamber of the Kremlin, whispered among initiates as the Garden of the Viscera. Inside this forbidden labyrinth, the Tsar had what today we would call a clandestine hospital. But it wasn't meant to heal. It was meant to harvest. Dozens of stone tables, vials filled with extracted fluids, surgical blades bathed in silver, and glass containers holding hearts still beating thanks to primitive mechanisms simulating heartbeat rhythms. The foreign alchemists directing the process came from Germany, Prussia, Transylvania. Their names were never recorded, but one of them, known only as Master W, left behind coded writing speaking of essence transfusions and retention of vital will beyond tissue. In one of those texts, a procedure called the Triple Feast is described. 3 victims of different sexes and ages were selected, and their organs were consumed in a specific order. First the heart of the youngest, then the liver of the woman, and finally, the eyes of the elder. According to Master W, this created a Trinitarian harmony that strengthened not only the Tsar's body, but also his soul. This level of detail reveals something deeper. Alexei was not a deranged sadist. He was a scientist of horror. He was convinced his acts were not crimes, but steps toward transcendence. In his mind, he was not a murderer. He was an alchemist of the soul, a pioneer of eternity. And like any perverse system, it required accomplices. He couldn't do it alone. Thus, many nobles, desperate to keep their privileges, began to collaborate. They offered slaves, prisoners, or even their own servants for the experiments. Some did so out of fear, others greed. Because Alexei promised to share his secret with those who demonstrated absolute loyalty. It is said that at least 5 members of the court participated in banquets where spiritual meat salads were served, a macabre euphemism for dishes made from human parts, carefully seasoned. The cooks of the Kremlin were divided into 2 groups, the public ones and the silent ones. The latter appeared on no official payroll. They had no family, no home, no voice. They lived inside the secret kitchens and received precise instructions. Each organ had to be prepared according to an alchemical protocol. Some were baked, others soaked in spiced wine. Lungs were dried and then rehydrated with dark liquids brought from India. And all waste was incinerated with aromatic oils so that the stench wouldn't seep into the rest of the palace. Cruelty reached such extremes that even musical dungeons were created, chambers where victims were forced to sing while their organs were slowly extracted, in an attempt to capture the essence of the musical soul. These songs were recorded by deaf scribes who drew gestures of pain and air vibrations onto parchment, believing this way they could preserve the vital music of the dying. One of the most infamous episodes was the Night of the 100 Tongues, when Alexei ordered the simultaneous removal of the tongues of 100 Tatar war prisoners, convinced that this way he could absorb their languages and understand all the dialects of the earth. According to chronicles, the next day he gave a speech mixing Russian, Turkish, Persian, and Hebrew, in a trance where his eyes turned white and his voice seemed to come from many mouths at once. But if horror reached new depths, so did its sophistication. Because to maintain secrecy, Alexei instituted a system of absolute erasure. Every witness entering the Garden of the Viscera was marked. If they survived, they were sent to convents, asylums, or remote regions. Their name was changed, their teeth were pulled, their spirit broken. This is how hundreds of voices capable of revealing the truth were erased. And yet, not everyone remained silent. Some survivors escaped, some wrote, some spoke. And those cracks in darkness would begin to widen slowly, threatening to collapse the monstrous immortal edifice of the Tsar. But the worst was still to come. If up to this point Alexei's reign could be described as a hidden horror, a bloody alchemy concealed behind the curtains of power, what happened next marked an even deeper and more disturbing turn. Because the Tsar, intoxicated by his successes, obsessed with eternity, and convinced that vital energy grew stronger when drawn from his own bloodline, decided to look inward. Peasants, poets, and prisoners were no longer enough. Now he desired to taste the flesh of his own lineage. The first sacrifice was his second cousin, the young Prince Dmitry Ivanovich, barely a teenager, known for his robust health and calm demeanor. Officially, he died of fever. But a confessor from the Zvenigorod monastery noted in his diary that the body was never buried in the family mausoleum. And an anonymous letter sent to a Lithuanian noble described the boys weeping as he was led through a secret passage of the Kremlin, accompanied only by the Tsar himself and 2 doctors wearing red gloves. That was the first time Alexei's inner circle felt true fear. Because until then, as macabre as everything had been, it had involved others. But with this act, the Tsar had crossed the invisible line of the sacred. Royal blood was no longer revered, it was devoured. The months that followed were a parade of disappearances. His niece Tatiana, his sister-in-law Marina, even his illegitimate half-brother Boris, who had once been one of his most loyal advisors, all vanished under strange circumstances. In each case, the official explanation spoke of illness, spiritual retreat, or voluntary exile. But no one believed these lies. The court filled with whispers, and fear became absolute. A text attributed to the alchemist Master W recounts what would have been the Tsar's boldest ritual, the ceremony of the eternal reflection. According to this account, Alexei gathered 5 members of his own family in a sealed night, one by one, all bearers of his direct bloodline. They were made to drink an elixir that dulled their senses, but preserved consciousness. Then, in the presence of obsidian mirrors and black candles, their organs were extracted while the Tsar drank the still warm blood from each into chalices carved with Aramaic inscriptions. The purpose, according to the esoteric doctrine of the ritual, was to reflect himself multiplied by 5, a way to fragment and then reconstruct himself with greater power. That same night, Alexei disappeared for 3 days. When he reappeared, his eyes had changed color. His hair, which had begun to gray, was now jet black. And he spoke with a new cadence, as if his voice came from a different throat. Some servants believed he was no longer just the Tsar, but that several souls lived within him, spoke through him, decided with him. One of the cruelest later experiments was the composite resurrection. Alexei ordered the remains of several deceased relatives, mummified or in advanced decay, to be collected, and commanded his alchemists to create a new body from them. The idea was to create an immortal double of himself made solely from his own blood. This body, known as the vessel, was embalmed, fed through tubes, and artificially kept alive for 6 weeks. He claimed he could communicate with it in dreams, and that, should his original body die, his soul would transfer there. Rumors of this experiment spread terror among the nobility. One of them, Boyar Vasily Shuisky, tried to denounce the facts before the Patriarch of Constantinople, but he was intercepted before leaving the country. It is said that his tongue was torn out and sent in a box to the Tsar, who boiled it in wine and drank it during a feast. Later, Shuisky's body was hanged on a tower with a sign reading, "Tongues that betray are offered to wisdom." The most disturbing part was that, despite the horror, Alexei continued to rule effectively. The Russian economy prospered. Internal wars diminished. Peasants, though poor, had bread and firewood. Foreign allies couldn't understand how a kingdom so dark inside could appear so orderly from the outside. The Tsar sent diplomatic gifts, decreed holidays, and made public appearances surrounded by children and elders. Yet every speech carried a sinister echo, as if beneath his words vibrated another voice, older, hungrier. Some claim Alexei began experimenting on his own descendants, that his son, Prince Fyodor, was forced to donate blood month after month, that his daughter Sophia was subjected to a process of forced hibernation, partially frozen in a capsule of liquid amber to preserve her eternal youth. There is no definitive proof, but several documents from the time indicate that none of his children were seen in public again after 1670. By that point, his obsession was no longer only with flesh, but with permanence. He ordered the construction of a stone chamber without doors, sealed from the inside, where he met with skeletons dressed as family members. He spent hours speaking to them, drinking wine thick as blood, singing litanies in dead languages. He claimed to find truth there, that the bones answered him, and that time itself stopped when he closed his eyes. But even in his delirium, something began to change. The machine began to rust. The rituals no longer had the same effect. His body, once strong and youthful, began to show signs of wear. Old knife marks appeared as glowing scars. His skin turned tight, like dry leather, and his gaze, once commanding, now seemed haunted by something visible only to him. Alexei's empire, built on bone and blood, began to collapse from within. His inner circle, exhausted by terror, conspired in silence. He was no longer a Tsar, but a feared creature, isolated in his rituals, speaking to corpses, demanding impossible sacrifices. The distant provinces stopped sending tribute. Some generals deserted, fearing they'd be next in his experiments. The church, silent for years, finally excommunicated him in secret, fearing his soul was beyond redemption. His body also began to betray him. His skin cracked like old parchment. His organs, subjected to centuries of alchemy, failed one by one. Even his alchemists, unable to halt the decay, fled or died mysteriously. It is said he died in his sealed chamber, surrounded by familial skulls, murmuring in extinct tongues. When they finally opened the chamber, they found only his crown and a thick, dark puddle like ink. There was no funeral, only silence. The people, upon learning of his story, burned his portraits and cursed his name. But some still swear his soul never left, that on moonless nights, his song can still be heard from the catacombs of the Kremlin. What drives a man to defy death at the cost of his humanity? What kind of inner void must be filled with the blood of the innocent and the whispers of the dead? The case of Tsar Alexei is not only a historical tragedy, it is a dark mirror reflecting the most terrifying face of unchecked power. The desire for eternity without morality, without soul, without God. For years, Russia was ruled by a being who confused longevity with divinity, devouring his own bloodline in search of immortality. He left no heirs, no works, no lasting monuments, only ruins, cursed rituals, and an indelible echo of fear. Because when power mixes with superstition and science without ethics, the result is no longer human, but monstrous. Today, his name is erased from official records. Chronicles refer to him as the Silent Emperor, or simply the Forgotten. Yet his story persists in whispers. Some say his spirit wanders, hungry, searching for new bodies to inhabit. And if the true price of defying death isn't divine punishment, what is it? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe someone like Alexei could have truly existed? How far would a human being go with absolute power and a deep fear of dying? And if you dare, answer this. Would you eat a heart if promised eternal life?